Truman Library in Independence, Missouri. We're in western Missouri, or about 20 miles east of Kansas City. So everyone's usually fairly surprised that we're that close to Kansas City. About a 20-minute drive along I-70. And this is Harry Truman's hometown, and this is the location of his presidential library. Now, behind me, I do not have a portrait of Harry Truman. I have a portrait of the First Lady from that time, Bess Wallace Truman. I'm actually in the Bess Wallace Truman conference room at the library inside the building. And I've got a painting of Bess Wallace Truman behind me that was painted by Greta Kempton, the official artist and painter of Harry Truman and Bess Wallace Truman when they were president and first lady. So I always feel like I need to explain that portrait that's hanging behind me in this beautiful setting in the library. We have about 16 million documents here in our presidential library and about 35,000 objects. And in those objects, we have a lot of World War II posters. And those are going to be some of the things I'm going to be sharing with you today. And as I do that, I'm going to be asking for your input. So don't be shy. But when I do come to your school, as I mentioned, I'll probably call on you by state. I will only need one person to speak at a time, because with this technology, it does become quite difficult. So what I'm going to ask you to do right now is, if all three sites could mute the microphones if they haven't done already, just so we don't get any extra noise. And then I'll call on each school in turn to get your feedback on particular posters I'm going to be showing you, and to get your information from you. And then I'll add some extra information in the middle, and then we'll wrap things up. So let me kind of show you what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about the issues that are important to the United States government in that time period, right during World War II, so between 1941 and 1945. We're going to talk about the issues that why they used posters and the issues that they tried to convince the American public about. We're going to talk about the role of men and women. We're going to talk about show you some anti-Japanese posters, because we happen to have a lot of those here at the Truman Library. President Truman is most well known for ending the war by dropping the atomic bombs on Japan. And so we have a number of anti-Japanese posters we can share with you. And then some posters by famous artists. So I'm going to just switch to some of the posters now. I'm going to see if I can get my technology to cooperate with me. And you'll see one poster up there, and then the items that I just discussed that we're going to talk about, those issues that were important to the government, the role of men and women, anti-Japanese posters, and then discuss some posters by famous artists. Let's go with that last one. I'm going to pick a state at random. Let's go to Cleveland, I think, Ohio anyway, close to Cleveland, right? And Akron in Ohio. Let's go to the Ohio school. And anybody there recognize who this poster that you see, who the artist or author might have been for this particular poster? Does that style look familiar? So in Ohio, if you'd like to unmute and then give me a clue to who you think that might be.
Dr. Seuss.
Dr. Seuss, very recognizable. Way to go. Thank you. Very easy one to start with today. I'm going to show you some more posters and cartoons by Dr. Seuss. Dr. Seuss was actually commissioned by the Office of War Information to help create some propaganda posters during World War II. So that's usually a good tie-in to some of those more famous things, you know, the children's books that he wrote. He was actually one of many famous artists that was commissioned by the government to create posters to help with World War II. And we'll see some more of his posters later on. Some of them might be quite surprising. So I'm going to put Philadelphia, I think it was, Pennsylvania anyway. I think you're near Reading, if I got my geography correct. Pennsylvania, you're going to be on the clock here. I'm going to show a poster here in a minute, and then I'm going to ask you to see what you can tell me about it, what you notice in the poster. So let me go to the next one, and hopefully we'll be able to continue this interactivity. So let me give you a second in Pennsylvania to look at this poster, and hopefully it's coming through nice and clear for you. And then if I could get a volunteer student in Pennsylvania to tell me the answer to the question really is, what do you notice in this poster that you'd like to share with me? So anybody in Pennsylvania? Anything that you notice about this poster?
So I notice a big transparent Hitler in the background, in front, like behind some people doing some drinking, so they would have some looser talk because they're intoxicated.
Okay, so some looser talk because they may be intoxicated. They got drinks in front of them. You noticed Hitler behind. Anything in particular about Hitler that strikes you as unusual? Any exaggerated features?
The ears?
The ears, very good. Why might the artist in this particular one have exaggerated the ears?
Because he would be able to, I don't know, hear, listen in, I guess.
Listen in.
Through people. Spies.
Right, so you've got the idea of spies and listening, and then you mentioned the two gentlemen and drinking. So somebody else, maybe another student from the same school, will switch locations on the next poster. Another student from the same school. Anything else you notice in this particular poster?
Somebody else, jump in.
I'm going to share the wealth here.
I'll take it.
Okay.
Well, they look like average working men of America, you know, got the bib overalls, so they're probably like farmers, and they're like spreading the information of America, you know, like what's happening.
Very good, thank you. And then what would you say is the message of the poster? What is the creator of the poster? What message are they trying to send?
Don't gossip, it's bad.
Don't gossip. What might that lead to?
Giving up secrets about your country, like farming techniques or something like that. I don't know. Like food shortages.
Very good. So between the two of you, you've kind of nailed that. You've got Hitler in the background listening in with a larger ear. You've got the two working men talking. There's a line of white text there that's really hard to read. So can you guys read that, or should I read that for you? Right below the glasses.
Can you read that for us?
Yeah, absolutely. It says in white there, "Don't be a dope and spread inside dope." So modern day language, we don't really use that word that way, right? Dope is a completely different meaning now. But there, it's "don't be a dope." What would be a synonym for dope today?
Schmuck.
Schmuck or idiot or something like that, right? And then spreading inside dope just means inside what?
Information.
Absolutely. So don't be dumb. Don't spread inside information. Is the kind of like a subheading. So you guys did a great job with that. So thank you very much. We're going to move on to another school in a moment. But if you'd like to mute again, that'd be great. But I much appreciate your participation. Then we'll move on to the next poster and some information about what the U.S. government was trying to do. So that was just kind of a warm-up exercise, and you guys did a great job with that. The government was using posters like this throughout the war for a number of different reasons. The first one we just looked at, wartime security. Security, whether it was in the factories, in the farms across the country, arms buildup, any kind of war effort they didn't want the enemy to know about. But as you can see there, I've got a list of other reasons on the slide why the U.S. government used posters like this to try and encourage recruitment, to get people involved in the troops, production of supplies, to promote equality, to gather war materials and conservation, to promote patriotism as war effort might be flagging at some point to keep people patriotic, for relief efforts for different groups that needed help, and then just general financing for fundraising and things like that. So they would sell bonds to help fund the war effort. So we're going to start with that one. And I think that we're going to go to Wisconsin next. So you be ready. I'm going to show you a poster in Wisconsin. We're going to look at two here in a moment, and you guys are going to be looking at the one on the left. I want you to take a couple of minutes to study that in Wisconsin, and then I'm going to ask you what you notice in this poster on the left, which relates to financing, is the theme for this one, which was the last on this list. So in Wisconsin, what do you notice about this particular poster? The one on the left of the two that are on the slide.
What do you notice, Jacob? I noticed that the two hands are the Axis countries, and it seems like they're trying to like either take the baby or take like our women and children, you know, and we should buy victory bonds to support the war effort to get rid of those hands or the countries trying to attack us.
Let me just do a quick follow-up. That was great information. You nailed it. What makes you say that those are the Allied? You're correct, but what makes you say that those are the Axis powers on the hands?
The flags that are like within the hands.
So what symbols do you see there?
Like the swastika for Nazi Germany.
Correct.
And the rising sun.
And the rising sun. And you may have got some help there, but I can forgive that because I can't see. It's okay. With this technology, it's, you know, I can't see that detail, so that's all good. And that means you work cooperatively, so that's even better. So you're exactly right. You've got these hands, and then what wording do we have on the poster to help us kind of interpret that poster?
Keep these hands off.
Keep these hands off, and then as you mentioned, the action there is to buy the victory bonds. Great job there. We're going to switch. That was we were in Wisconsin then, I think. I'm going to get all my states confused, I think, this afternoon. We're going to switch to Ohio, and we're going to look at the one on the right. Same slide, but the poster on the right. So in Ohio, what do you notice on this poster on the right?
There's a person climbing on top of something.
Somebody climbing on top of something. Anything else that you notice?
Someone is standing around that corner.
Somebody's kind of hiding around the corner. Very good. Anything else? What about the writing? What writing do you see?
Can't see the white.
It's too blurry.
Okay, the white's too blurry. So the white part at the top, and it's also in cursive, so it's a little trickier. It says, hasten the homecoming. So what does that mean?
Yeah, it just fixed a little bit.
It says, hasten the homecoming. What does that phrase mean?
What does that mean? Hasten what?
It's an unusual word. Go ahead.
Make the soldiers come home faster.
Make the soldiers come home faster. So what again is the same tagline for this one? How are we going to get the soldiers home faster?
Buy victory bonds.
To buy the victory bonds. And then you see the family, there's a house there in some kind of ill repair. We don't know if it's been damaged in the war or if they're fixing it up. And then you see the soldier kind of in the foreground coming home, kind of in uniform. So that's the man coming home, and then you've got the family waiting and people are fixing up the house. So it's trying to get the soldiers home quicker, win the war faster, buy those bonds. So that's kind of the financing one. The next one we're going to go to equality, and I think we're going to be back in Pennsylvania if I've got my order correct. So the students in Pennsylvania, I want you to take both of these at the same time, so I'm challenging you a little bit. So what do you notice on these two posters, either one for the students in Pennsylvania?
Well, I see that in the one picture of the guy in the Navy. I'm pretty sure that's it. He's African American, so if we're talking about equality, they're saying that all African Americans could join the war also.
Absolutely, very good. And then on the left?
Yeah, I can't see that one.
Is it hard to read that one? I apologize. I did say in this morning's presentation, I will be emailing the PowerPoint to all of the teachers so you can see some of the detail. The red writing around the side, you can probably see the banner that says Americans All, I would assume.
Right.
Around that, you've got a lot of last names: Kelly, Williams, Santini, Schmidt, Du Bois, Nietzschewich, Cohen. What are those last names representing, do you think, that I just read off to you?
They're all different ethnicities. So
All different ethnicities, right?
we're talking about to get everyone that we have here, even if they're from a different ethnicity than you are, to get them into the armed forces as well.
Very good, excellent. And then there's a quote at the bottom, and you probably can't read that, from FDR, where he talks about employees and coming from different backgrounds, all working together, coming together despite their race, creed, color, original origin. So all different immigrant backgrounds, all coming together for the war effort. Let's talk a little more about the poster on the right. What else can you tell me about the poster on the? You mentioned a sailor, you mentioned an African American. What is he wearing on his chest?
A medal.
A medal. Okay, so he's wearing a medal. And go ahead, I think someone was going to say something. Maybe not. What's the caption on that one?
Above and beyond the call of duty.
Above and beyond the call of duty. And so this was an appeal to have more African Americans involved in the different services of the military, in this case, the Navy. Interestingly, just as a side note, by the end of World War II, the United States troops were still fighting in segregated units. So actually, although African Americans were in the branches of the military, they actually fought in segregated units in that time. It wasn't for another 3 years until President Truman did an executive order in 1948, July of 1948, integrating the military, all branches of the military. So in World War II, despite the fact they were fighting against the Nazis and against the Japanese, the troops were actually segregated. So this issue of equality became more and more important. And actually, once World War II was over, African Americans were calling for integration, and by the end of World War II. So that's kind of an interesting one that they would use that. I think we're going to go. I think we'll go to Ohio next, and I may have gone out of order, and that's okay. We'll get around back to everyone. In Ohio, I'm going to show you two posters with the subheading of conservation. So in Ohio, what do you notice in these two posters? Either one. Any volunteers in Ohio?
On the left one, it says, the left one, it's talking about explosives, and I think that's a cannon right there.
I could get you to talk a little bit louder or closer to the microphone.
There's like a cannon, and it says safe waste bats for explosives.
Very good. And then the one on the right?
It's a plane crashing, probably.
Okay, so is there any symbolism there on the plane that might indicate what country that plane is from?
You kind of can see the flag.
It might be him. You can't really see it though.
Yeah, there's.
Off the one line right now. We'll see if we can get a clearer picture.
Okay. Yeah, there's a cross on there, and that's to represent Germany. Other than using the Nazi symbol, often the cross was used on their military aircraft and tanks to symbolize that country. So that would be a German plane. So the idea there of using the scraps, recycling rubber, metal, rags, everything could be used towards the war effort. You saw the same kind of thing with the fats on the first poster, using fats for explosives. They're wanting housewives. They're appealing to housewives to save all their fats for explosives. Okay, we're going to go to Wisconsin again, I think. I hope I'm right. So help me out with this one. We've got 2 new posters. What do you notice in this one?
Oh, Jerry? Come on, come on. Oh, they're so quiet all of a sudden.
That's okay. I'm sure there's extra credit for a really good question.
Jackie, what's the message on the left telling us to do, or telling people to do? Okay, you can help me build a plane, so.
Probably like working to help towards the war.
Zach, you're up close. Can you read the words on the bottom of that poster for us?
Working to win.
Yes.
It says you can learn quickly and you will be working to win.
So I think it's
Emily?
to join the workforce. The work.
Were you able to hear that?
Yeah, you guys did a great job. I appreciate the teacher helping bringing them along. So you're really getting some motivation there. They're really pointing at you with the large uppercase letters. You can help me build a plane, and you can learn quickly, and you will be working to win. So it's 3 times using that word you. So real direct motivation. How about the one on the right? I realize the white label might be difficult to read underneath the photograph, but if you can read that, someone up close, that really gives away most of the message on this one.
Can you read it for us?
It says the 5 Sullivan brothers missing in action off the Solomons.
And then in the red underneath.
They did their part.
Okay, they did their part. So what's the appeal there? How are they motivating you?
Go ahead, Emily.
It's like motivating you to work because they're in war and like doing their part, so we should do ours to like help them.
Right. So these Sullivan brothers, the implication is these Southern brothers maybe have given their lives, right? They've gone missing in action.
Yes.
So they've likely given their lives for the cause, for the war. So they did their part. So this is an interesting one because it doesn't use the word you, but that's directed right at the viewer. What is it wanting the viewer to? What the viewer of the poster? What is it wanting you to do next? Do you think?
Do your part by working.
She said, do your part by working.
Do your part by working. And that could become in any number of ways, right? I mean, the motivation there is whatever role you're in, it appeals to everybody, young and old, every ethnicity, every person. They did their part, you do yours, whatever that may be, whether it's working in the factory, joining up, helping mom and dad if you're a child. It appeals to all segments of society to do their part. If all 3 sites could mute, I'm going to give you a little bit more information, and then we'll come back to some interaction. I do plan to stop at about 1:45 for questions, and I may well do some interaction before that too. But I want to get through a little bit of information that comes from the Office of Facts and Figures and Office of War Information from the 40s. Thank you all 3 sites for participating so far. You guys are doing a great job. So some of these posters, this information is from an article from the Office of Facts and Figures, which is, really incredibly named federal government office, which makes me laugh, but from 1942. But the title of the particular piece they were using internally was How to Make Posters That Will Help Win the War. So these posters were not accidental. They were a planned, thought out strategy. They looked at what kind of posters worked, what kind of posters didn't. They held competitions. As I mentioned at the beginning, they invited famous artists to participate. And so they talk about in their report that, often you see symbols in posters. We saw the Nazi symbol. We saw the rising sun. Sometimes symbols don't necessarily arouse the correct enthusiasm. They're often misunderstood. People don't quite get the message. And so their idea was that they should use realistic photographs, really direct messages, so there's no ambiguity about what the message is. So next to that, this is one of the most striking posters I've found. It's a photograph So it's not a cartoon, it's not a symbol, it's a photograph. And it's kind of like those old Western posters you see in cowboy towns, right? Wanted for murder. So very simply. And then underneath, what did she do wrong? It says her careless talk cost lives. So she's led to people being killed because she gossiped or she told secrets or whatever it might be. So very direct message. So that was kind of what they were leading to. But those symbolic posters were often very popular, even if they didn't necessarily get their message across. So in recruiting, the government did all kinds of studies. They decided that those, as I mentioned, the photographs, those kinds of things were usually the most effective. The symbolic and humorous ones attracted less attention. They caused confusion. But then when they had competitions, the humorous posters won. I'd like the students and the teachers to think about, advertising today is a little different, but during the Super Bowl, on Monday after the Super Bowl, everybody talks about the humorous commercials, the funniest ones, the ones we remember. Whether those are effective in selling their product, we'd have to look into. But some of those same issues you can apply to these kind of wartime posters. The funny ones, the ones that capture our minds, those may be the ones remember, but do they make us act on what they want us to do? So we're going to show you a few examples of other kinds of posters. This one for recruiting, and you see the American flag and the soldiers in the foreground, and this very symbolic Lady Liberty there. And then when we go forward, it isn't just about joining the military. Maybe it's joining nursing or something to help the Red Cross, that kind of caring approach. I'm going to run through a few of these because I want to get to a couple of key points here. Or whether it's to help with transportation, don't block up the railroad lines, keep out of the way when those factories are supplying the goods to the war front. That war traffic must come first, it says. Now, the United States was not the only country to do posters. The Axis powers had them. Germany used posters, and the Allies used them. I've got an example of a French poster on the left and a British poster on the right to give you some examples. And this one on the right from Great Britain is looking at the various countries of the British Commonwealth and the British Empire, like in Australia and in other countries around the globe, coming together, working together, because this is a global war. There's fighting in the Pacific, there's fighting all over the globe. A couple of other British posters, and one of them, I'm originally from England, and this poster on the right resonates with me. This is about evacuation in the British cities and the English cities, especially the larger cities that were targeted by the Nazis for the planes to drop bombs on in what we call the Blitz. Families were encouraged to send their children away from the cities to live on the countryside, what we called evacuation. And there was a couple of waves of that. And so this one, you see mothers send them out of London and give them a chance of greater safety and health. Now, this was not just London this happened in. It happened in all the major cities in England and Scotland. Mostly the children were sent to the countryside, to farming villages. As a personal experience, both of my parents were 10 years old when war broke out in Europe in 1939, and both of them were evacuated twice from the major city of Liverpool to the Welsh countryside, to Welsh farms, a couple of different times during the war. So these posters were pretty effective. Sometimes families really need to be encouraged to do this. They didn't really want to let the children go. The parents stayed and worked. So in my case, my mother, she was sent to a Welsh farm. Her father was not in the army. He worked on the railroad. We just saw those railroad posters. He was working on the railroad, getting the manufactured ammunition and so forth on the trains and getting them loaded and sent to the front. So the families were encouraged to stay home and keep working while the children were sent out of the city for their protection. Back in the United States, last couple of things before I come back to you, the role of men and women and how they were indicated on these posters. And I think I might go back to some interaction here. So let's go back to Wisconsin, and we're going to ask you to look at these two particular posters of women and how they're portrayed. So tell me in Wisconsin what you notice in these two posters.
Guys, talk loud, Aaron.
Women who are symbolizing a strong figure, other women, so they would want to join the workforce and support the country.
I caught most of that. If maybe the teacher could paraphrase a little bit for me.
She's saying that the women that were working on the poster are trying to encourage other women to join the workforce and do their part.
Excellent, very good, thank you. And do you recognize the poster on the upper right?
Did you get that?
I did not.
Rosie the Riveter.
Rosie the Riveter. So you've got that very famous poster, and there's a whole interesting backstory about that, about the original model for that poster and so on. It's a whole history lesson in of itself, a whole other presentation. But the strong women working in the factories, you've got women working in office pools and things, but really encouraging, as you said very rightly, encouraging other women to get involved, to persuade people to get involved. Very patriotic, strong, encouraging other women. Okay, we're going to switch to Ohio, and you can take on the men. So what do you notice about the role of men in these two posters in Ohio?
What do we see here, guys?
It's like the men are like holding the weapons, actually fighting.
And how are they portrayed? Do you think they really dress like that?
No.
So what do you notice?
Not in their uniforms.
A little bit louder.
Not in their uniforms.
They're not in their uniforms. What else?
Lifting a whole bunch.
Did I hear the word strong?
Yeah, carrying that whole bomb with his bare hands.
Carrying the whole bomb with entire hands. Why do they think both of those men are not wearing their shirts?
Why do we think they're showing off here? Like, what are they trying to symbolize here with the bare chest? Just
They're strong and their muscles, right? Showing these strong men with no shirts on, very masculine. Okay. So that was a kind of deliberate strategy in the terms of the way the gender roles are portrayed. And again, you could compare that to today's kind of advertising, how men and women are depicted. We're going to go to Pennsylvania. I'm very proud of myself. I'm doing well with my states. Pennsylvania. So now we're going to move a little bit into, because anti-Japanese posters. So Pennsylvania, what do you notice in these two posters?
Well, on the poster to the left, the American flag has holes in it, and there's black smoke in the background.
Okay. What else do you notice?
Well, we can't really read the words that it says too well.
Okay. Well, we'll take it. If you can squint and close one eye and get real close to the screen, there's a date on there. Do you have a guess of a date that's the same on both posters?
Oh, December 7th.
December 7th. So this is the easiest question of the day. So you ready? What is that referencing?
Pearl Harbor.
Pearl Harbor, right. Now, that seems very simplistic to us because we're very familiar now with that, but this was a common message that was used in anti-Japanese posters to always to remember, it says on the second poster, avenge or revenge, so invoking Pearl Harbor becomes a common theme in anti-Japanese posters. Okay, so thank you for that. I think we're going to go to Wisconsin next. We're racing through the states here. It's good. So Wisconsin. So here we use some more caricatures and less about Pearl Harbor in December 7th, but more symbolic and the way Japanese people are portrayed. So what do you notice in Wisconsin about these two posters?
In the first poster, the Japanese are like depicted as rats, and we're gonna trap them in Alaska.
Very good. And so it's rats. And what about the poster on the right? What do you notice on the poster on the right?
It looks like a Japanese power, like a Japanese person of authority, and it seems like it's going back to the like keeping us like don't talk like a lot because like they can hear us. So, like he's interested in like what we have to say about the war, and like if he overhears something that he'll know like our plans.
Very good. Now I want you to try. The reason I've got two on there, I want you to compare them a little bit. What symbols are the same on both posters?
The rising sun.
Rising sun. So you've got the rising sun through the window on the right, and then the rising sun on the hat of the mouse. Okay. Look at the facial features. What facial features have been used as a caricature here?
Speak louder, Jake. The teeth are kind of defined.
You got the teeth, yeah, kind of prominent. Anything else?
Squinty eyes.
Kind of squinty eyes. So those are what we call a caricature or stereotype, right? Exaggerated. And we're going to see another example of that here in a moment. You guys did a really good job there. Remind me what state I was in there because I'm losing track. Were we in Wisconsin?
Yes.
I got it. We're in Wisconsin. So Ohio is up next. We're going to keep rotating. This is working pretty well. You guys are doing a great job. About 5 more minutes, then I'm going to throw it open for questions. I hope all of the classes can stick around long enough for that. Some more anti-Japanese posters. In this case, down on the bottom left. If we're in, we'll be in Ohio again now. So in Ohio, what do you notice? Let's talk about the one in the bottom left first of all. What do you notice about the poster on the bottom left?
It says, like, what have you done to help us?
What have you done to help us? Excellent. What else do you notice?
There's, I think, Hitler and someone from Japan.
Hitler and somebody from Japan. Okay. What else do you notice? Anybody else in the class want to help? You're doing a great job.
Yeah, there's something at the bottom here.
Something at the bottom. Okay, what similarities do you see in the way Japan is depicted from the previous posters?
Doesn't it say you?
Somebody looking at that says the poster says you staring out.
Policeman, maybe? Is it a policeman saying that says you?
It says you. It's hard to tell, isn't it, whether it's a policeman or whether it's just a regular person. I'm going to go with regular person right now. It says you. How is the Japanese figure portrayed similar to the other two posters we saw?
Here we have the similarities of where they were showing him as a rat with the teeth and the eyes.
Yeah, so with the eyes and the teeth. And I just want to cover the last one, the upper right. Sometimes, usually when these posters tend to focus on Germany and Japan, I did want to give you an example of one that includes the third Axis power, which is Italy and Mussolini. And so that poster where those enemy ears are listening, we have Mussolini up there in the top left of that particular poster. So I just wanted to make sure we didn't miss that. Come to some. Go ahead. I think I had a comment.
Thank you, sir. We actually are going to be out of school in less than a minute, so we just want to say thank you.
Well, if you have any, very good. Well, thank you. If you have a quick question, you can throw it out right now.
I don't think so. Thank you.
Need to go. Okay, we're gonna stop there. I'm gonna put it back to the camera because I'm cognizant I want to get questions. So, who do we still? Let's go back to Pennsylvania and see if you have any questions for me.
Okay.
Which part of the population was affected most by the posters? Was it like young adults or middle-aged men?
I think that's a really good question. I'm not sure that any particular analysis is done in that, but I think, as you can see, the different posters were appealing to different people. So, you know, the posters that are appealing to women are aimed at women. The posters appealing to men, appealing to men. I think for the most part, they were all effective, but I think the studies they did through the Office of War Information found that, as I mentioned before, even though in competitions the humorous posters were liked, they weren't as effective, whereas the serious, like the Sullivan poster where there's the 5 missing brothers, or the single photograph of the female that's been responsible for lives being lost, those very direct, realistic ones, those types of posters were the most effective. What is less known is which segments of the population were the most affected by them. So I know that's not a complete answer, but that's history. Sometimes we don't know all of those answers. But certainly the types of posters we know which are most effective. What's less known is which segments of population they affected the most. Great question, though. Who do we have left with us? Do we still have Wisconsin?
Yes, we're here.
So would you like to ask a question, please?
Anyone have any questions? Jake, when did these appear in the war? Was it like just as the war started, they were already like commissioned?
Yeah, like, but so that's a really good question. Most of them started in 1942. So, you know, the United States comes in after December 7th. There's already an effort before the United States is in the war to support the Allies, support the Lend-Lease Act, to support the British. So there have been relief posters and posters to help the British. And so some of that's happening, but then to officially help with the war, it starts pretty quickly after Pearl Harbor in late 1941, and in 1942 it goes into full gear, so to speak. So that's a really good question. You did have some Americans fighting in the war prior to 1941. So you had American pilots who, it was illegal, but they went over and joined the British pilots and flew in the RAF, and joined the Canadian pilots. And so some people kind of did it surreptitiously, you know, join the Allies, but then the United States didn't officially get involved until after Pearl Harbor. Really good question. I think we just have the 2 locations left, so maybe a couple more questions. Do you have any more questions in Wisconsin?
Anyone else?
Were there like specific places they would put the posters up to try to get more attention from them?
Yeah, so they'd often be inside of buildings like government offices and things like that, certainly post offices. A little less than you might imagine on the streets and things, but certainly insides of buildings, places of work, certainly every federal building, every government building, post offices, things like that. So they would be very noticeable and very widely distributed. That was a really good question. Let's go. Thank you for your questions in Wisconsin. We're going to switch to Pennsylvania and maybe get a last couple of questions from you.
Yeah, why do you think the use of the propaganda poster for wars has gone down over the years? Like after World War II, there wasn't as many. Like now, there's not as many propaganda posters like targeting a certain group. And,
I think it's the change in technology, the change in medium, television in particular, of course now the internet, but certainly the recruitment. You know, you see advertising on TV for recruitment for like the Army, the Navy, things like that. You go to a college visit, you'll see college recruitment, to try and get college scholarships by joining the military and things like that. So the strategies have changed in terms of marketing, in terms of recruitment for the Army. So certainly the medium, you can do a lot more with video than you can with a still poster, right? So I think that just the change in technology, television was very limited in the 1940s. In fact, President Truman in 1948 was the first president to have a television in the Oval Office. So that shows you what a rudimentary technology that was. It had a $100 television set that's about 4 inches across. The television was not in everybody's home in the 40s. Of course, today everyone has multiple televisions. So I think it's the medium. The change in technology has changed marketing and promoting of that kind of effort. So, you know, if you get a particular conflict since then, like Korea, certainly Vietnam, certainly the Gulf War, you see a lot more messages on television than you would on posters. So good question though in terms of the marketing and promotion. But still, even though they're a different medium, they're a great thing to contrast. You could contrast, you know, the recruitment of college students through, you see lots of brochures and flyers, as well as television advertising for that kind of recruitment. Any last question there from Pennsylvania?
Were there a lot of propaganda posters in, say, some of the other American wars further back, such as the Civil War?
I'm glad you brought that up. Less so in the Civil War, but the one that really stands out and really started the trend in, so to speak, was the First World War. There's a lot of First World War posters out there, not just from the United States, from all the countries involved. There's German World War I posters, there's British World War I posters, and there's certainly plenty of American World War I posters. So there's a very famous American World War I poster where the Germans are portrayed like King Kong, and King Kong has kind of the German helmet on his head, and he's called a brute, and he's got his arms out wide. So that one you can probably find with a very quick Google search, a Google image search, to see the kind of imagery that was used in World War I is really where it exploded. So you think of the printing press and the use of color in printing, that really exploded during that period in World War I and was used quite significantly then. Much less so than, much more so, I should say, much more so than anything in the 19th century. 19th century tended to be more hand-drawn, political cartoon kind of things, black and white, less widely distributed. Interestingly, in this area where we are in Missouri, close to the Kansas border, there's a famous artist, George Caleb Bingham, who has a famous propaganda piece of art relating to the fight between Missouri and Kansas. And he did reprints of his painting that was used as kind of a way to show what these bad Kansans were doing to the Missourians through their Order Number 11. So going back to pre-Civil War, you had reproduction of artwork, not necessarily poster. I mean, the original painting for that is in Columbia, Missouri, and it's about 20 feet wide. But they did reproductions of his painting, which people then distributed in a very different way. But that kind of gets to that similar kind of method of artwork being used to convince people of their message. So that's about as close as you come, but it's a very different medium. You don't have the graphic artist. It's much more the artist doing their works. I will say on one last thing on artists, I mentioned Dr. Seuss. Norman Rockwell was involved in creating propaganda posters for World War II. So that would be kind of a neat project to look at some of the famous artists that were brought in by the government to help promote the war effort. So Rockwell was brought in to look at FDR's Four Freedoms during World War II. And as I mentioned, Dr. Seuss was also brought in, amongst many, many others as well. So great questions. Any final question or comment from you guys in Pennsylvania?
No, thank you for answering our questions.
You're very welcome. I really appreciate your input. And any final comments or thoughts from Wisconsin?
No, but thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks to all of you for participating in that.